Thursday, Friday. We got 2 days, and the Supreme Court SCOTUS is out of there, but they got a bunch of stuff to do. Like there's, 10, 11 cases. Give us a rundown. Mike Berry, what's going on, and how can they get all these done?
Well, thanks for having me, John. Yes, you're exactly right. The court actually had to add another day to their opinions calendar, meaning the days in which they are going to release opinions. Yesterday, we saw 2 more opinions come down. One of them was a pretty big one, Murthy versus Missouri. That's the one that one of the number of cases that deals with this practice known as jawboning. Jawboning is when the government tries to pressure or coerce a private company to essentially do the government's bidding for it. And in this case, social media companies. We've known as Americans for years that social media companies are, especially those of us who believe in America first, who are conservative warriors, and we want to express our views on social media. And the Biden administration doesn't like our views, doesn't approve of our views. And of course, the government itself cannot censor us. That would be blatantly unconstitutional. So they knew that they do the next best thing. They get the social media companies and the big tech companies to do their bidding by censoring us on their behalf. And the Supreme Court, well, actually, the state of Missouri and a number of other states challenged that practice, and the Supreme Court dismissed those challenges, but only on a technicality, a procedural technicality called standing. In other words, saying that these states couldn't show that the states themselves were being harmed by that, but there may be a need in the future for private citizens to show that this was happening to them in an ongoing basis. And so a lot of it, Murthy is the name of Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States. So a lot of this stemmed from COVID and the government trying to shut down people from putting information out about COVID and the vaccine. And the court, I think, looked at that and said, well, we're kind of past that now. At least, Lord willing, we're past that, the pandemic issue. But and so anyway, it got booted and dismissed on a standing ground. But there are some cases the court still needs to release that many of us at AFPI and around the country are watching very, very closely. The biggest of the bunch is probably Trump versus United States. This is the one that will determine whether or not President Trump is immune, and any president is immune from criminal prosecution for conduct that includes acts that occurred while he was still in office. So I want you to think about this, John. You're the president of the United States, okay? And you have to make a lot of decisions, right? We all understand that. We understand presidents have to make some very, very difficult decisions to send American service members into harm's way, to expend American resources, right? To take great risks. I want us to think about all the times in American history when a president's had to make a very difficult decision that may have even been politically unpopular at the time they made that decision. We're talking about the Emancipation Proclamation. We're talking about Hiroshima, D-Day. We're talking about putting up somebody on the moon, right? That was controversial at the time. If a president is constantly going to have to look over his shoulder and think, if I do this, am I going to get dragged into court and prosecuted because somebody doesn't like what I did? We will never have an Emancipation Proclamation. We will never have the end of World War II. We will never have a moon landing or any other major decision that a president has had to make while in office because they're constantly going to be worried about being prosecuted for that. So I think the Supreme Court really needs to come down, put its foot down once and for all and say, no, when you're the president of the United States, you have to be able to make tough decisions without worrying that you're going to get prosecuted. And so you need to have full immunity from the decisions that you make while you're in office. So that, to me, in my opinion, what the Trump versus United States case is all about. The last one is the other really, really big one that folks are paying attention to is called Loper Bright versus Raimondo. Let me make this an analogy. Imagine that there's a law or a regulation that says you have to allow police officers, if you're a trucker, all right, let's say you're a long haul trucker, it says you have to allow a police officer to ride with you to make sure you're not hauling any illegal substances in your truck, make sure you're not going over the speed limit, make sure you're paying your tolls, make sure you're putting the proper gasoline in or diesel in the truck, et cetera, et cetera. And oh, by the way, for years, the government said, because we are requiring you to do this, truckers, we're going to pay for the salary of the police officer. We're going to pay for their lunch, et cetera. We'll make sure that we cover the expenses of you having that police officer with you. Well, a few years ago, the government said, you know what? We changed our minds. You're going to pay. The taxpayers and the private companies and the American people, you're going to pay for those police officers to to ride along. Well, that's exactly what happened, except instead of it being truckers, it was fishermen who were fishing in the Atlantic Ocean. And those fishermen said, you can't do that to us. We don't want these police officers or, maritime observers to be riding on our boats in the first place. And now you're making them ride with us, and now you're making us pay for it. And they challenged that. And really what this case is all about is not just whether the right or wrong of that and whether it upsets people, but it's about how much power are we going to give the federal government and this thing known as the administrative state, right? These federal agencies that are filled with unelected, far-left bureaucrats who make rules and make laws and control more of our lives than any other part of the government. And how much power are we going to give them? And it's time for the Supreme Court to rein them in and to say, no, that we have to have a separation of powers in this country. And the only body of our government, going all the way back to like sixth grade civics, the only part of our government that makes laws is Congress. And if you want to have a law that says that, then you better put it through the legislature. This is not what unelected bureaucrats get to do from their offices in Washington, D.C. So that's what we're watching very closely, John.